Blizzard seems to be planning to revamp a number of specs in Legion, and one of them is Discipline. If I played Discipline, I might be horrified, delighted, or have mixed feelings about this revamp, since they're going to emphasize a damage for healing mechanic with Atonement instead of damage prevention. It seems like taking a Discipline Priest is going to be like taking half a healer and half a DPSer. I'm not quite sure how to react to that. I mean, will a Disciplined Priest be able to heal a 5-man dungeon if he's not overgeared? If so, that either means you'll have a healer and an extra half DPSer, which makes Disciplined Priests imbalanced compared to other healers, or else you only really need half a healer to heal a 5-man. And if half a healer can heal a 5-man, then what does that mean for full healers? Will we be getting bored and doing DPS half the time? Don't get me wrong, I love the idea of being able to hybridize, and I would also love it if I could glyph my Healadin to be able to off-tank or off-DPS for that matter. But placing a whole spec into an inherently hybrid role seems like it's opening a big can of worms in the metagame, and I'm not sure how it'll play out. Hunters going melee is the biggest change I've ever seen, and, well, the revamp to survival made me mad when I first saw it. I should play what I originally recorded while my microphone port still worked here.
Apparently, Blizzard had a great idea for an artifact spear, and they said to themselves, it's a hunter weapon. That is an old joke from vanilla, when stats weren't as refined as they are today, and when hunters wielded both a melee weapon that they almost never used and a ranged weapon. Only vanilla players are laughing at that joke, and even then they're probably groaning. Okay, so now that I have made the throwback joke to vanilla, Blizzard, the joke is over. You can announce that you're not making survival hunters into a melee spec now. Honestly, why would they even do this? The core abilities of the hunter class are built around ranged combat. Yes, survival once upon a time had some melee abilities and talents in it, but that time is long past. There were some specs like Retribution, Enhancement, and Survival whose talent trees back in vanilla were almost a hodgepodge of miscellany, and it took years for those specs to finally find their grooves. Now that Survival has found its groove as a ranged spec that has lots of procs and lots of non-physical damage, why fill that groove up with horseshit by changing the basic premise? Blizzard, this is a bad idea. There is one good thing to be said about it. You announced it early on, and that early announcement gives us time to react. Well, here's our reaction, Blizzard. Take out the spear. It is not a hunter weapon, and make a crossbow instead. You have a bow for marksman, a gun for beast mastery, and the third type of ranged weapon in the game is a crossbow, which would neatly fit for a third spec. And since you can make a crossbow so that it looks awesome, please do so, and give it to survival hunters. Now, I made the mistake of recording this before I actually browsed the forums and saw how many players were actually looking forward to this concept, but it was funny enough that I wanted to leave it in this video anyway. There are plenty of ways for Blizzard to mess this concept up, but it's clear to me that Blizzard is trying to make each spec and each class's look and feel be very distinct and iconic. That's probably one of the reasons why they're adding artifact weapons. I have mixed feelings about those. Again, there's a story behind each weapon, and story is a good thing. Plus, the fact that you're getting those weapons will do more to help with class identity. I'm pretty sure I've talked about how I'd like it if there are more in the game that would show you what your class's place is in the world, and how your class uniquely fits into the Warcraft lore. And I think that these artifact weapons and hopefully class order halls will help connect each class and spec to the lore of the game. All this being said, the fact that every one of a given spec will basically have the same weapon 24/7 throughout the whole expansion leaves me wondering, will every player look exactly the same? I hope not, and Blizzard is clearly trying to avoid that with a lot of different skins for those weapons and hopefully even color customization, and the fact that transmogs aren't going away. Heck, survival hunters, if they really wanted, could probably transmog their eagle spear to look like a staff. So if you find yourself doing a legacy dungeon or raid and a caster staff drops, guess what? That may actually be a hunter weapon. Though there's one thing about hunters losing a ranged spec that bugs me. Blizzard has so far added 2 classes to the game, and both are melee classes. One of the reasons I was expecting Sea Witches to be in the next expansion was because they were ranged, but instead Blizzard is now adding a third melee class, and they aren't giving Demon Hunters a ranged spec. I've heard their interview about how they're struggling to make each spec distinct, and that, in retrospect, if they could have done it all over again, they might have made some classes have less than 3 specs, which is why they're only giving a tank and melee DPS spec to Demon Hunters today. Plus, they don't want to dilute the awesomeness of the Demon Hunter by putting half their ideas in one spec and half in another. To me, it looks like Blizzard is making a mistake that they made in vanilla that cost the game dearly. They're focusing too much on their vision for what each class should be, and not focusing enough on what's good for gameplay in the game overall. What I think is better for the game overall is to have a ranged DPS spec added in this expansion, and they can easily enough get away with giving one to Demon Hunters. I mean, the fundamental concept of the Demon Hunter, according to the lore, is that they use the Legion's own magic against them. Doesn't that fundamental premise imply that they can cast magic? And doesn't that imply a caster spec wouldn't be out of place? Looking at Illidan's kit in Warcraft 3 in the Black Temple kind of hints that it wouldn't be out of place, and yet the devs aren't adding a caster spec. Despite what's good for the overall game and despite what the lore implies, they're disregarding those, sticking to their vision of what the class should be and making them melee only. That's not what disturbs me most about the devs' attitude about class design, though. They made the mistake of putting their vision for what a class should be ahead of what's fun or functional in vanilla, and that mistake hit the Paladin class hard, turning them into a class that could only heal and that only had melee damage, and a sucky melee damage system at that. I've had about 2 different video series criticizing this and explaining why it's a terrible thing, so I'll just say here that I'm hoping very much that Blizzard doesn't take away the nice, shiny, pretty, ranged, no cooldown, on-demand, direct damage spell that I pined for in vanilla and finally got in Cataclysm and Mists. Another reason to keep Denounce around is that it allows me to do something while I'm waiting for my mana to come back. It feels like a nice, fun damage for mana mechanic. Even though I know it isn't one, it still feels like one. Now, if Blizzard took away Denounce, made me a melee class, and gave me some melee strikes that don't cost mana to make up for removing Denounce, then I'd need to go into the already crowded melee area to actually make use of those strikes. That idea doesn't appeal. All that being said, if Blizzard wanted to give Holy Paladins like me a melee system to be used while we're soloing, I wouldn't mind too much, as long as we still had good ranged damage options available to us, like we didn't in vanilla. I'd be all for a melee system if it gave us some AoE damage tools in particular. I've been trying to get Blizzard to take my Seals plus Denounce idea, and I still like the idea and think it would be excellent, but the way they're revamping every spec, I wouldn't be surprised if Holy didn't even have Seals by the time they're done with us in Legion. Given that the core abilities of the Hunter class revolve around ranged weapons, Blizzard might just be getting rid of core abilities and forcing players to pick a spec at character creation. That has its positive aspects and negative aspects. On the plus side, you can get more cool abilities earlier, but on the minus side, that means less room for hybridization because fewer abilities are shared between specs unless Blizzard is actively trying to make hybridization possible. And who knows whether or not they'll do that in this expansion. It could go either way. Next time I'll be talking about professions, the setting, and a few story points I didn't go over before.